So thank you for joining us tonight for this evening's Artist and Inspiration Program. I'm Cheryl Bronstein, Director of Interpretation at the Adirondack Experience. And I would like to start this evening's program by acknowledging that the Adirondack Experience is situated on the Aboriginal territories of the Mohawk and Abenaki communities. Indigenous people continue to live in this region and practice their teachings and lifeways. The Adirondack Experience is open for our 2022 season, and we very much hope that you come visit. We are thrilled to bring a full season of both in-person and virtual programs to you over the next several months, many of which are focused on our upcoming permanent exhibition, Artist and Inspiration in the Wild, which will open July of next year. The new exhibition is wholly devoted to our unparalleled art collection. And you'll be able to see many of the works in the exhibition that Sandra will be speaking about tonight. I am thrilled to introduce Sandra Hildreth. Sandra moved to Saranac Lake in 2001, where she works full-time as an artist, primarily doing plein air paintings of the Adirondacks. And she also travels and paints some of our national parks out west. She is a member of the co-op galleries in Saranac Lake and in Malone, and she exhibits in regional and national juried shows. And she created the nationally known Adirondack Plein Air Festival, which is happening in August of this year, the third week of August. And her work is represented in the Adirondack Experiences collection. Throughout this evening's performance, please do feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom to post any questions. We will be doing a Q&A at the end of Sandra's presentation. So Sandra, take it away, please.
All right, thank you, and thank all of you who are attending. I'm happy to be here, and I'm not sure if I'll remember everything I want to say, but we'll give it a shot. And for me to share my screen and bring up my slideshow, I have to do it while my program is in the edit mode. And then I can click on play and we will be ready to go. So I was very pleased to be asked to give this talk because I've spent 50 years of my life being inspired by the Adirondacks, and some of those years I didn't even know it was happening. But pictured is one of my larger plein air paintings that I did over several days. And I'm starting with this one because I found a quote when I was doing some research about Hudson River School artists and other 19th century artists who came to this area. I found this quote, and it has a definite connection to the view that's in this painting. So I would like to read that. It's from a story called Adirondack Days by Henry Vane. It was published in Harper's Weekly in October 1881, and it was describing a tour of the Adirondacks, and in particular, the stagecoach ride from Keene Valley to North Elba, or Lake Placid. From the ponds, the road wound onward through a still heavier forest, broken only by a few new and fertile clearings, and then emerged on the high rolling plain of North Elba. Here at last, the great mountains came in view, a majestic range of dark and solemn forms outlined against the sky. The weird, fantastic ridges of the Gothics, Marcy's granite dome, the scarred and sullen face of Colden, the giant mass of McIntyre, and most wonderful of all, the Indian Pass opening like a huge gateway into a boundless world of light. That's the view in my painting is what he was talking about. And so anybody who's traveled Route 73, either going east from Lake Placid or coming in from the east, heading towards Lake Placid, when you pass by the Lodge Road, you get this view. And it really is just magnificent. And I think that's what I've tried to capture in a lot of my paintings. But before I talk more about my work, you need to know a little bit about my background. There were books in my house where I grew up on the bookshelves about these four artists. There was a book about Andrew Wyeth. I'm not sure why. I know my mother actually bought books at an estate sale to put on the bookshelves because she thought it would look nice to have all these big books. But in any case, there was a book about Andrew Wyeth, and I remember looking at it over and over again, and the fact that he painted in a very limited area, his farm in Pennsylvania and some property in Maine. And he did new paintings that were always different, but they were of the same locations. He was really exploring those two spots. There was a book about Winslow Homer, and it was mostly about his illustrations of the Civil War, but there were a few other paintings and stuff in it. And I remember seeing some of his works done in the Adirondacks, never in my wildest dreams ever thinking that I would one day be in a boat in the same ponds where he had done some of his paintings. There was a book about Frederick Remington, and it was mostly about his cowboy and Indian paintings, but I still found it interesting, and the way he painted the landscape. And again, I'm growing up in Wisconsin, mind you, never again realizing I would one day live within 10 miles of where he was born and would have the opportunities to visit the Frederick Remington Museum in Ogdensburg, New York, and to know that he also painted in the Adirondacks. And then there was a book on John James Audubon's Birds of America, which was this series of exquisitely painted illustrations of all these different bird species. And not only are they accurate, but they were beautiful works of art. So I grew up looking at stuff like this, and nobody said, oh, you're talented artistically, you should look at these books. I just kind of did it because it seemed interesting. Fast forward to 1971, and I was working in the Pratt Institute Library in Brooklyn. And I was an assistant clerk for magazine subscriptions. I was also taking some graduate classes. I came across an Adirondack Life magazine that had this Rockwell Kent painting in it, and it may have even corresponded with the time when he passed away. But I love this image. I'd never grown up where there were mountains. I'd never been to the Adirondacks, but I was really moved by that scene and the golden alpenglow on the mountains. And then I also happened to be there when this copy of the Temporary Study Commission report, The Future of the Adirondack Park, was delivered. And I remember looking at it and thinking, wow, I never knew this place like this was in New York State. And again, who knew that I would come to live much of my life up here? I have to backtrack a little here. This is what I was doing when I was in college. I was doing these large geometric design mandala paintings, somewhat influenced by Tibetan Buddhist mandalas, because no one was encouraging anyone to do anything realistic. The whole idea of subject matter had sort of been thrown out the window, and op art and pop art and abstract expressionism was all the rage, and nobody was teaching anything about realism or anything like that. So I got through college by doing designs. And the painting on the right is actually one of my Adirondack mandalas, which I incorporated the geometric patterns, but I filled them in with Adirondack landscapes. And to me, it presented sort of a spiritual view of the place. I was also a full-time, by the time I moved to Northern New York, I was a full-time high school art teacher. And I developed a humanities course along with a social studies teacher. in which we called it class, cultural literacy and art and social studies. And we taught American history and art. And I have to tell you, I never had any art courses in college that talked about American art very much until the 1940s and 50s. So it was kind of new experience to go researching what was going on in America as our country developed. On the left are two paintings by Carl Bodmer, which a lot of people have never heard of, but he and George Catlin traveled in the American West in 1803, shortly after the Lewis and Clark expedition. And he painted things. They didn't have cameras then, so he was recording the Native Americans that they met and the landscape of the West. And I just thought that was really, must have been a pretty moving experience to be recording these new places. And I was painting at home. I was painting from photographs. And then I thought, well, why not take a set of watercolors and a sketch pad when I go hiking? So I took my 12-year-old son and his friend, and we hiked up St. Regis, and I did that little painting that's on the right, which is not a very good photograph, but I don't have the original anymore, so couldn't improve upon that. And it was also at this time that I joined the Adirondack Mountain Club and started going on hikes and started doing some of the 46ers. And I did a couple of the trailless peaks. And people who were doing this knew that there were herd paths that you could find that would help you find your way to the summit. But the group I was hiking with decided they would do a bushwhack hike up these two mountains. And so we were not on any trail at all. We were trying to fight our way through the dense spruce and pine on the summits. And sometimes you weren't even on the ground. You were 2 feet up on the air, walking on top of moss-covered tree trunks and trying to find your way without slipping and falling. And there too, I had sort of a revelation, and I thought, I could be walking where no one else in the world has ever walked before. And I'm experiencing this mountain totally unknown to me in a totally unique experience. And I know that that had an influence on how I chose to work and what else I chose to do. So I've been to the Adirondack Museum, as it was called then, a number of times, and I love this painting. It's by Charles Ingham, the Great Adirondack Pass, which happens to be Indian Pass, 48 by 40 inches, 1837, painted on the spot. And it was part of the Fair Wilderness exhibit and book, of which I have a dog-eared copy of and love because of all the images that were in it. So I saw this painting and I thought, well, I know where Indian Pass is. Those are two pretty big rocks. I'm going to see if I can find it. Now, just to give you a little sense of scale here, at the bottom of the dark rock in the center, there's a little red square. That red square has been enlarged on the right side of the screen, and it's a person. It's a guy wielding an axe. And the red box on the left of the painting is an artist sitting, sketching. So those rocks really have to be big. I mean, like, 8 or 10 times taller than a person. Must be easy to find. So I went in on Columbus Day weekend one year. I drove to the Upper Works trailhead so I could hike in from the south, because I think I read that that was the easier route. And I got up to the point where I thought I found the rocks. So the upper left image, above the light colored rock, there's a blue arrow because it has a very distinctive shape on the top. The bottom left picture is my photograph of that view. And you really can't make out the rocks, but I could when I blew it up larger. And there's that blue arrow is on top of the light colored rock that's in the painting. And then on the right side is a whole composite of photographs that I took. I made several trips to Indian Pass, and it was, I would say it was some of the most rugged hiking I have ever done, because the pass is full of big, huge boulders and fallen trees and streams, and there are no railings, there are no steps, you're climbing over rocks, and it's very rugged. So the picture on the right is a composite. And again, if you look for the blue arrow, it's towards the right side, closer to the top. And that is the top of the light colored rock in the painting. And then I superimposed a picture of me on it. So you can see Mr. Ingham kind of exaggerated the scale a little bit. The rocks are not as large as he portrayed them. But part of the problem was he really didn't paint the whole painting there on the spot. I'm sure he did sketches. I'm sure he probably did some watercolor studies. But this expedition in 1837 went on to be the first recorded ascent of Mount Marcy. They were not going to be hauling a 48-inch painting around with them. This was just too rugged a place. So I challenged the idea that he painted it on the spot. He painted it, and it's certainly based on very accurate sketches, but I don't think he painted it there. So I painted it. This was the first painting I did from the photographs that I took, and I've got the two rocks in there in the lower right corner, and I've got the view. It's Wall-Face Mountain on the right, one of the highest vertical cliffs in the east, looking south with just a little glimpse of Henderson Lake at the opposite end of the pass. But I kind of have the same problem that Ingham had, and that is you can't tell the sense of scale. How big are those rocks? You really don't know. They could just be boulders you could push over if you pushed hard enough on them. So I did one more painting of Indian Pass. This was after I returned on another hiking trip and tried to get more reference photos and put myself in to give it more of a sense of scale. So one of my lucky children will inherit this someday. Now, a little bit of art history here. And I confess I'm not a scholar. I've not spent my life devoted to researching all of this. I read some books, went to museums. I like to figure stuff out for myself. And one of the things I learned was that in America in 1825, maybe only 1 out of every 10 paintings was a landscape. And if it was a landscape, it was likely a painting of someone's farm or a little village scene. It seems strange to think that here people were settling an unknown, unpopulated, other than our Native Americans, wilderness area, and yet they weren't painting it until Thomas Cole made his trip to the Catskills in 1825. And he did extensive sketches and studies and went back to his studio in New York City and did 3 paintings and put them up in his window. And apparently they sold right away. People really liked them. And that kind of got the Hudson River School of Painters started. And by 1875, 9 out of every 10 paintings produced in America were landscapes. And they were probably these kind of wilderness landscapes as opposed to farms and villages. And this is one of Thomas Cole's paintings that he did in the Adirondacks, or he at least did the studies for in the Adirondacks. And I'm going to make a generalization about the Hudson River School paintings, which will probably make some real art historians frown, but I'm going to do it anyway. I found that almost all of them had very dramatic skies or weather conditions. It might be storms or sunsets or sunrises or something dramatic in the sky. Sweeping panoramic views, something like a dead or broken tree in the foreground. This particular painting has them on both the left and the right side of the composition, kind of gnarly, broken trees, kind of symbolizing the power of nature or God over man. And that became pretty common in a lot of the Hudson River School paintings. There's two other artists, Frederick Church and Sanford Robinson Gifford, both paintings that were of Adirondack locations. And I really marvel at these, the fact that they did not have color cameras to record what they saw, because those colors are really hard to mix. I can tell you, because I've tried painting them. It's very challenging to do. So my assumption is that they did a lot of studies. They would sit out there and make notes on their sketches. The section of sky between the mountaintop and the clouds is a pale lemon yellow color. And they would make all these notes, so when they went back to their studios, they'd be able to paint them. So I started looking around. I got a couple of grants to, my proposal was I wanted to research locations of 19th century paintings, and I wanted to do my own paintings of them. So one of the first ones that I came across that I thought was really interesting, and this is not a very well-known artist, Ella Follette Terry, and it's called Baker's Clearing, 1829. It's the painting on the left. And this is the property that later became the North Woods Club. And Terry was the person who invited Winslow Homer to come spend some summers there. So I got myself invited there. I think I'd been at the museum for an event, and somehow I asked for the name of the caretaker at the North Woods Club. I wrote him a letter, said I was an artist and I wanted to know if I could come visit, and they invited me. So I met with a family there. I got sort of a tour of some of the property, and it was, really very pleasant. And then it got late in the day and they said, well, it's kind of late and you've got a long drive home. Do you want to spend the night? Do you want to stay in the main lodge? And of course I said yes. So I woke up, I was the only person in the lodge. It's not the original one that Winslow Homer might have been in, but it's still a lovely historic place. And I took photos that I then painted the painting on the lower right, doing the same view that was in the Terry painting. And you can see I've stuck in one of another Adirondack Mandela painting, and that one is all views from the Northwoods Club. And it was a watercolor. Then to the left is Martha Fosberg Wilson, who also I became friends with. I think she contacted me interested in buying some paintings, and her family had been members, still are members of the Northwoods Club. She invited me to her cottage, and I sold her some paintings, and I also gave her a painting, and she allowed me to paint the view from her property. And then I was very saddened to Google her last night, trying to check and see how she was, to see that she passed away from COVID in April 2020. So now my paintings. What I have found is I just love to go back to places over and over again because they always change. All three of these paintings are of the view from the Lodge Road, Colden and Algonquin, and sometimes I fit Indian Pass in there. Indian Pass is the little notch to the right on the two paintings on the left. And it just marvels me how things change. It can be the changes during the time of day where the shadows are. It can be changes in the weather, whether it's cloudy or stormy. It can be changes in the season. But I just find it fascinating to be able to set up my easel and sit there and try to capture the essence of whatever place I happen to be looking at. That's how I love to spend my time. Whiteface is also a subject that I've done a lot of paintings of, mainly because I'm so close to it here. I live in Saranac Lake. So if I head towards Lake Placid, Paul Smith's, I have the view that's the upper left painting. That's right by the Harrietstown Cemetery. And again, I marvel at how it's always different. The sun comes up behind Whiteface, so it looks one way in the morning. And then as the sun passes overhead, it will look different in the afternoon. And there's fields in the foreground and woods and other hills. And it just always catches my attention. The next painting to the right, going clockwise, is of course the ski slopes from the Wilmington side of Whiteface, painted on I think it was a spring day when it was just some of the early or last of the snow was still there. The next painting on the right is one of the paintings from the western viewpoint of Whiteface. So it's capturing the alpenglow that happens late in the day. And if you've never seen this, it's absolutely amazing. I love trying to be out at a time where there's alpenglow. It's hard to predict. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it isn't, but that rosy pinkish orange plus the blue shadows always attracts my attention. The next one on the bottom right is also from Gabriel. So it's from the west looking east towards Whiteface. And there are beautiful sunsets there. So that's the eastern sky, clouds that pick up the color from the setting sun, which is actually behind me. But it makes for a good painting, nice, soft, subtle colors. And then the painting on the bottom left is a view from north of Whiteface. And this is one that not a lot of people will see. This one's done from Franklin Falls Pond. But it's just sort of a different composition. And again, working with different seasons and the different colors that show up. And speaking of Whiteface, this is painting I had some of the most fun of all doing. You know, you can drive up to almost to the top of Whiteface and you can park and then either take an elevator to the summit or you can walk up something like the last 600 feet of elevation gain, whatever it is. It's going up over rocks and there are some railings you can hold on to get to the summit. So another painter, Nancy Broussard, and I decided we'd go up and paint on Columbus Day one year. We went up as early in the morning as we could, which was good because it was still and quiet early in the morning. And that's a 30 by 40 inch canvas I brought with me. I wanted to do a big view. So I sat up on the rocks looking down at Lake Placid below and quickly as I could, started working on this painting. And the cool thing about being there, it was perfectly still, no wind, beautiful peak fall colors. And all of a sudden there was this little bit of a hum. And up from beneath me rose a glider. And it just was coming up, riding the air currents. And that was pretty neat to see. So I got quite a bit done on the painting while I was there, a little bit more than what shows in the large image, but I had to finish most of it in the studio. First of all, they closed the road after Columbus Day, and chances of having another sunny, calm day were probably pretty slim. I've also done painting from my canoe, not actually in the canoe because it moves around too much. I tried that once. I tried with little watercolors sitting in a canoe that was anchored somewhere, and the wind would just make it shift like 180 degrees. So that wasn't very conducive to painting. But I brought my paints with me when I went on canoe trips. So the bottom painting is a watercolor of Madawaska Pond, another kind of remote, wild looking place. It used to have some camps on it, but when it became state land, most of the camps were taken down. So it's pretty wild looking. So that's just a little study done with watercolors. The painting on the left is from Lake Lila. I went with a group of friends. We paddled around for the morning, and then they landed on the shore and decided they would hike up Mount Frederica. I convinced one of them to come with me, and we paddled out to an island, and I set up and did this painting. Just totally enjoyable day. Then the painting on the upper right is Madawaska Pond again. And this was a pretty interesting story, of which a lot of my paintings do have stories. That's why I like doing them, because something usually interesting happens with it. I wanted to go out and paint somewhere away from where the little launch site was. I really wanted to get upstream, find a really wild looking place. So I put my solo canoe in the water, and I load up my easel, paint box, and gear, and a backpack, and lunch, and water, and all that stuff. And I carefully step into the canoe, and I try to push off from shore. Well, I didn't notice that it looked like beavers might have chewed off some young trees that were growing along the shoreline, and they were below the water level, and my canoe was sitting on top of them. So I tried to push myself away from shore again, and I dented the bottom of the canoe, Kevlar, and a little bit of water seeped in. So I'm thinking, what should I do? It didn't seem like very much water was coming in, so I foolishly decided to go on and paddle upstream into Madawaska, into Quebec Brook from Madawaska Pond. And I found this nice spot to paint. I really didn't get much water in the canoe. And I sat up there and I spent the day painting. And I was writing notes for an article to do about, how an artist can spend their day painting. And then when it was time to go, I packed up and I paddled back, and everything turned out fine, but it really was a pretty stupid thing to do, because no one would have known at all where I was. There was no register to sign in. No one would come looking for me. So I try not to do that anymore. Right, another artist who I greatly admire is Rockwell Kent. And I'm not sure if I saw some of his paintings at the museum or at Plattsburgh State, where they have a collection of his work. But I had the opportunity to go paint at Asgard Farm, which is in Ausable Forks. It's where he lived and painted. And I think the first time was for North Country Public Radio for a fundraiser. But I've been back several times. And it's not like I look at one of his paintings and say, okay, I'm going to try to paint that same view today. But I've painted the same views that Rockwell Kent painted. So my paintings are the top and the bottom on the right. And this too, I think I'm attracted to the fact that what little sign of man there is just totally dominated by the mountains. The mountains are the strongest elements of the painting and say the most about nature. And then anybody who knows me well knows that I like to go out and paint at the Paul Smith's Vic. There are some absolutely wonderful hiking trails there that go to really scenic locations. Whoever laid the trails out did an outstanding job. And this little rocky outcropping is one of my favorite spots. It's Barnum Brook flows through here out into a marsh. And I counted, just for this program, I counted, and I have done 41 paintings of just this spot. And they're all different. Because again, I go in different seasons. I choose different compositions. I go on different weather conditions and different times of day. And, just really like to explore the subtle little things that make each painting unique from any other one. And this I did a week ago from tomorrow. I did this on Tuesday, June 14th. I was taking part in a week-long plein air event at Paul Smith's College. And so I went to my favorite spot there at the Vic, and this is a slightly different angle than I've painted before. And this is what I end up with after about 3 or 4 hours of painting. This is what I call blocking in the colors, getting the basic shapes established, indicating where the darks and the lights are going to be. And what happened here was, number one, it was lunchtime and we were going to a different location after lunch. But the other thing was the light was totally changing. It had come in from the left, slanted across the rocks, made that yellow strip of bright colored grass on the top of the rocks. And that was all gone now because the sun was moving across the sky and behind it. So what I'll do for this, since I live close by, is I'll go back another day. That's a nice sunny day, and work on finishing it. When I do this with a lot of my paintings, I don't think you have to finish it all at one time, although sometimes I do, and when I do, I feel really good. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of talking about how I actually do paint them. So first you'll see my canvas is not white. If you look at the picture that's on the left, I tone all my canvases with usually like a burnt sienna color. I'll squirt some out and then I'll take a rag and I'll wipe it all down. So it just tones the canvas so it's not white anymore. And I do that because when you're outdoors working on a white canvas can really be bright. It can actually impact your eyes and how you see the colors of the landscape. So by toning it down to a more neutral brown or gray, that kind of helps put the colors on top of it and get them accurate. And also when you're painting, sometimes you miss little spots, and I don't like having white spots showing. So this way, if I miss a spot, it's only that brownish color. So what I do first is I mix up a neutral gray. I take a paintbrush and I draw the composition. And it might only be 4 or 5 lines, just where the horizon is, the major shapes, where the darks might be, and that might take me all of 5 minutes. And then I start painting. And I start filling in the colors, and you can see in that left photo how I've came pretty close to matching the color of DeBar Mountain, which is in the background. Then the central painting, I've blocked in more of the colors, and I'm working mainly on the ground, and I'll add in the water and the sky later. And then the painting on the right, I don't remember now if it was actually done at that point, but the whole canvas is covered. And I was probably stepping back to take a look at it and make decisions as to whether it needed any more work. And you might wonder how one can do this in like 4 hours. You used to work really fast. I know I used to paint in my studio a lot, and when artists work in their studio, they take their time. You know, it's comfort controlled. It's the lighting is always the same. You can have music playing, you can sit down, you can take your time, you can go take a break, you can come back another day and work on it some more. But when you're plein air painting, you've got to move fast. You've got to, at least that's how I approach it, is you need to capture what it is you're seeing as quickly as you can before it changes too much. Now, I want you to look at these same 3 photos, and this time just look at the background. So the one on the left, the sky is pretty much overcast. The water is all a light gray. Look at the middle photograph. It's got more clouds in the sky, but some clearing going on. And there's sky starting to be reflected in the water. And then if you look at the third photograph on the right, there's a lot of blue sky and clouds, and a lot of blue sky and clouds in the water. So I basically painted all the ground forms first, anticipating that I'd get clearing skies, and then I did the sky and the water later. But I do all this without putting a lot of thought into it. I'm just in a zone where I'm looking and painting, looking and painting, looking, mixing colors and painting. And here's another one. This one is a view from Heaven Hill Farm in Lake Placid, looking out at the high peaks. So again, I have my toned canvas, which in this case is, I think it was 10 by 20. And I mixed up my neutral gray and I sketched in the contours of the mountain. I made sure I got in what I wanted to include in the painting. And I intentionally made the ground and the mountains low to the bottom of the canvas. I wanted this painting to be about the sky and what was going on in the sky. And actually, I have to correct myself here. It's not Heaven Hill Farm. This is back at Asgard Farm in Sable Forks. So looking at the high peaks from the east. So again, I did the lines. I start filling in the color. The photo on the left is all the color that I got filled in without taking a break. I always tell myself, stop and take pictures because people might be interested in seeing the different phases, but I get in such a zone that I just work like crazy. And then all of a sudden I realize, oh, I should stop and take a picture. So the picture, it's a photo on the bottom of the view that I was painting. And when I started out that morning, like the other one, it was all overcast skies. And when they, as time went on during the day, the clouds did lift. And so this is what the final painting ended up looking like, with some open space of sky and a little bit more light coming into the mountains. And you might look at it and think, wow, that looks like it's finished, but I know it's not. To me, it's just got the basic shapes and colors blocked in there, and I haven't added the details. I need to work on the clouds more. I need to work on the colors of the mountains more. They change so quickly, and it's really a challenge to get what the colors are. We know that the mountains are green because they're covered with trees, but the atmospheric perspective of looking through layers of atmosphere makes everything look bluer. And then sometimes the light comes through and you get patches of sunlight, which gives a yellowish cast. And it's all just a really interesting experience. And this is how I love to explore places. As mentioned in the introduction, I've traveled to some of the national parks. I've been to Glacier National Park 6 times, and I've been to Georgia O'Keeffe's Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. And I paint when I'm there. I take photos too. I've got 80,000 photos on my computer. But to really learn a place, I like to paint it. I like to bring my paints with me, and it means I'm standing still, but I'm studying every contour and every shape of the land. I'm feeling the breeze, and I'm smelling the smells and seeing the deer that might come out. I've oftentimes had a beaver swim by while I was painting. They're very curious. And if I move, then they slap their tail at me on the water. But it is just such a fulfilling experience for me to go out and paint and record what it is that I'm seeing. And I almost feel like this painting is going to come the closest of any of I've done to matching that Henry Vane quotation about a gateway into a boundless world of light. That's what I feel like you're seeing as you look into the mountains that are now being brightly lit by the sun. So that is pretty much all that I want to talk about. I'm ready to answer some questions and stuff from you. And I guess I can go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I have to remember how to do it here. So I have to exit and then stop share. That work?
That works. Thank you so much, Sandra. That was so incredibly evocative. I think your descriptions, they just made me want to go outside. And I'm sure that many of the people watching tonight felt the same way. So we do have some questions. Do you ever paint with watercolors when you're out?
I do, but I tend to just do little paintings with the watercolors. I'm not sure why. I feel like I have more control of color with the oil paints. Watercolors are very unforgiving. It's hard to fix mistakes because they're transparent. So the oil paints allow me much more flexibility.
And along those lines, I actually thought it might be helpful to talk a little bit more just about what plein air painting is. How is it different from other types of painting that artists do? So maybe just a little kind of plein air 101.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, it's done very quickly. You have to be quick to capture, even if you spend all day, it's the next day, it's still going to be different. So you have to work quickly and sort of intuitively. And I really don't put a lot of thought into it. I don't analyze it. I don't sit back and think, what are people going to think of this? Or have I done it correctly? I just paint. I just let it come out of me and paint. There are some people who feel plein air painting is more like a study, that you would do a study first, a small painting, and a lot of artists do this. And then you go in your studio and you use that as a reference and you do a big painting. To me, I just want to do it all at once. Maybe I'm impatient, but I would rather just be outside and do it.
Or back at the Vic,
Yes.
you certainly have invited us to burn a bond with what your painting showed. So we have a question from another Cheryl. What type of easel do you use that can withstand the various types of ground settings that you find?
That is a really good question. And it showed in some of my pictures, but not very well. Most people are familiar with what's called a French box easel. It's a rectangular wooden box. It's got 3 telescoping wooden legs. You open the cover of it up and you've got a thing you can slide up, and that will hold your paintings. and the box part can actually hold your paints and your brushes. And it's called a French easel because supposedly this was what the French Impressionists developed. They were among the first artists to really spend a lot of time painting outdoors. I'm sure artists have always done paintings outdoors, but maybe only little studies or practice things. So I've gone through 4 French easels. They are wobbly and you can adjust the legs so you can stand them on uneven ground, but they're made out of wood and they're fairly lightweight and they're wobbly and they don't hold the painting canvas very tightly. So I'm using one that's called a Soltech easel, and it's all made out of aluminum. It still has a box. It still has 3 legs that telescope and fold up against the box, but it's not much bigger than a laptop computer, maybe thicker, maybe a little bigger. And I can fit it easily into a good quality hiking backpack. So I can fit all my gear. I have a separate pallet that's in a plastic covered skinny box. And I have a brush bag, a canvas bag with all my brushes in it. So all that fits into a backpack. I can add my lunch, a raincoat, extra canvases, and I can hike anywhere I go with that. I know a lot of plein air painters bring rolling carts with all their gear, and they bring umbrellas and sunshades and stools to sit on, but I prefer to travel light since I like to go hiking to places to do them. And one other thing I'll mention about my oil painting is there certainly are some hazards with using oil paint. Certain colors may have carcinogens and you should be careful with them and breathing the fumes and stuff. But there are, first of all, things called solvent-free gels, which is what I use. It comes in a tube. I can use it to thin colors a little bit if I need to. I can use it to clean brushes in the field. So I don't bring any turpentine or brush cleaner with me anymore. I don't use it anymore. I use the solvent-free gel to clean my brushes outdoors. And when I get home, I use Murphy's oil soap to clean them. There are also water-soluble oil paints that have been developed. And there are acrylic paints that they've slowed the drying time down so that they're more suitable for outdoor painting. So
we talk a lot about the journey that artists must have taken. And I think you just hit on something that we try. It's impossible to imagine what a lot of these early painters, like the burden of getting to where they were. And you know, you mentioned Ingham's work. It was quite a journey. So we have a question from Kathy. Do you do pencil sketching to lay out the shapes of the mountains and buildings, or do you paint it directly?
Takes too long. A lot of painters do. They bring their sketch pads or they sketch directly on their canvas. I just want to get going. That's another thing I guess makes me impatient. So I just do it with the paintbrush. If I get a line in the wrong place, I take a paper towel and I wipe it off the canvas because it's still wet. So no, I don't bother to draw. I love to draw, but I don't draw.
This actually, we've got another question that relates to the same one from Carla, asking if you finish it in one site visit. And I know, again, you mentioned going back to the Vic to finish the one that you started last week.
I would say probably 70% of the time I don't finish it on location, but I will get the canvas all covered. And because I've spent 4 or 5 hours on location, I'll have lots of visual memory and notes in my head. I do take some photos, but I was going to mention this in my talk. It was quite a few years ago when I realized the camera does not capture what the eyes see. And that's probably why those Hudson River School painters actually got the colors pretty good, because they were taking notes and writing down what the colors looked like. They were not relying on cameras. And anytime you see a landscape painting now that's got like black shadows in it, it's probably done from a photo, because the photos seem to increase the contrast. And you don't always, it's hard when you have a bright sky and a dark foreground. The camera doesn't know how to deal with that, but our eyes can handle that with no trouble.
That was one thing that struck me when you were showing so much of your work, was just the range of colors that you showed. You know, and you mentioned the alpine glow, and then you've got lake scenes, and the range was infinite. So we've got just a couple more questions.
Okay.
So we've got a question from Anne. How do you know when to stop? What makes a painting done?
When your fingers are frozen and your feet hurt, there's too many bug bites and you're sunburned. It's generally the lighting though. When the lighting has really changed, like if you start out with the sun on the left and it sweeps across the sky, and now it's coming in from the right, if you start changing, which I'm guilty of doing a lot of the time, oh, it looks pretty with the light from the right, so I add a highlight over there, you pretty soon end up with muddy colors on your painting. So it's often, you know, the light has changed too much, it's time to stop. Or all of the paint is too wet and gooey and it's impossible to change a color. Now you really need to let it harden and dry up a little bit before you can make changes. So like I said, about 70% of the paintings I will finish later, and I'll either go back to the spot, that's my favorite thing to do, or I'll work from memory. I don't usually pull those photos out because they're not accurate enough, color and lighting wise.
So we have a comment from Kathy that I think is a really nice way to wrap up our evening program with you. She says that she's admired your work for a long time and tonight has been a thrill, which I think we all can agree on that assessment. And just wanted to let you know that she loved hearing about how you work and the thinking behind it, and thank you so much. And with that, I would like to go ahead and say thank you very much for this evening's presentation. This has been absolutely delightful. I would like to invite all of you to join us on next Tuesday, June 28th, for the next program in our Adirondacks for All series, Identity and Environmental Justice in the North Country. This will be a program about incarceration in the North Country. And in July and August, our Artists and Inspirations programs are going to be moving back to the museum. We will actually be in person for the next 2 months. You can find out what's coming up on our website. I know that our August 8th program has not yet been posted, but we do have Carl Heilman coming on August 8th, and on July 11th, Bill Cross will be coming to speak about Winslow Homer, which Sandra talked a little bit. Sandra certainly mentioned him, and information on those programs will be, if it's not already up, it will be on our website, so please go ahead and check there. Recordings of both of the upcoming programs will be available for those who are unable to join in person, and we will post a recording of tonight's program in the next couple of days. So please go ahead and check our website, and we hope to see you at the museum. Sandra, thank you so much. This has been absolutely delightful.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and thanks to all the people who logged in to watch.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.